sweat and reality, labor, hard labor, grinding labor came in response to man's disobedience to God. And from that day onward, man is living by labor alone, hard work, dedication. So my topic today is living by grace. We often talk about living by faith, but I want us to think about living by grace, especially on a Labor Day where the world is living by labor, hard work and sweat and toil. How can a believer live by grace in this difficult world? How do we get grace? Where can I find grace? And what happens if I do not live by the grace of God? The person who lives by the grace of God always finds rest in the spirit or soul. But a person who is not living by the grace of God is always under tremendous pressure, stressful life situation, worry, cares of this world, deceitfulness of wealth, anger, frustration, resentment. You think about all the negative side of life are the result of not living by the grace of God. So, how can we live by the grace of God? As I was preparing for this message, there was a news about Boris Baker, famous tennis player who was and is still known around the world, rich and famous. There is hardly anyone in the sporting world who doesn't know Boris Baker. But a few days ago, he is sent to jail. He is totally bankrupt. He has left nothing in his hand. His name, his fame, everything is gone down. And that didn't begin recently. He became so famous at the age of 17. Lots of money, name, fame, popularity. And as a result of that, he began to develop a lifestyle of luxury, where he could not live without money and spending with all that his heart's desire wanted. After he retired from the tennis world, one day he said, I don't know who Boris Baker is now. Especially when I have to make a passport, I don't know what to put in my profession. Because for Boris Baker, tennis was his God, sport was his God, playing and winning was his life's purpose and aim. And after that he has got the money and all, spending money he thought that would give him the purpose of his life. He went on to spend so much that he had no track of how much he spent. And today, because of his huge amount of debt, now he has to go to prison. A man who is lost in his name, fame, popularity and hard work. Without the grace, no matter how powerful we may be in the world, without the grace, no matter how rich and famous we may be, life is one after another struggle. It is a hard and sweat and toil that defines human existence in this world. Sometimes we think that the rich and the famous people live in peace and happiness. Yes, money can buy, but it can only buy to a certain extent. But the people who live by the grace of God, they may not be famous, they may not be rich, they may not be powerful, but one thing they know, they live in this divine, eternal rest and peace God has given to them. If you are living by grace, your life is defined by rest and peace, that everything is all right, no problem what happens, everything will turn out well. If I am not able to do something today, what can I do? I let it go. I let it fall in the hand of God. By the grace of God, everything will turn out well. We don't fret. We don't grind our teeth. We don't sweat over a certain problem, because we hand it over to God, who says, my grace is sufficient in your weaknesses. So my first point today, living by grace, is that weakness attracts God's grace. In life, when you are weak, when you are failing, when you are written off by everyone in the world, it is at that time the grace of God begins to work. That we will read from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 to 10. Let us read. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times, that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, this is the main point, therefore most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that is physical weaknesses, sickness or failings in the health. So he said, I will boast about my infirmity, my sicknesses. I will not boast about my muscles or my gym work or workouts, my strength, my vitality. I will boast about my physical weaknesses, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, again, there are 2 therefores in this small passage. I take pleasure in infirmities. Now, he is not telling I enjoy becoming sick. He is telling it is difficult to be sick. You cannot do what you wanted to do. But yet, when I am sick in my body, what happens is that it tells me how weak and useless I am. And when I realize my limitations, when I realize my weaknesses of physical health, then I know that there is a God who works in my life in spite of my weaknesses. So I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches. This is insult or disgrace. When people come against you, accuse you, revile you, or say all kind of bad things, it's not easy. Even in fact, living in an online world, when someone criticizes you, it's not a good feeling. Yet, those criticisms, those bad kind of responses to what we do, they bring us to our realization that, oh, I am a human being. I am not as good as I thought I was. And they bring us back to our senses and say, Lord, here I am weak. People find fault with me. Maybe, yes, they are right in many areas. So he says, I will be boasting about my reproaches. I'll be delighting in my reproaches. And then next is in needs. That is physical need, financial need, whatever the needs we have. A person who is living by the grace of God is not afraid of sickness, he is not afraid of insults, he is not afraid of needs, because he knows that these things drive that person on his knees. Then those things become the channel by which God brings us to our real realization of who we are, and then we fall on our faces before God and say, Lord, unless you help me, I cannot go on. So weakness attracts the grace of God. When we become broken, David says, God will not reject a broken and a contrite spirit. A broken heart and a contrite spirit, God will not despise. God will not reject. Second, he said, I will delight in persecutions. That is, when you face opposition because you're a believer in Jesus Christ. If you're a minister, when people accuse you, come against you, persecute you, if you're a Christian and you're put in prison or arrested, you rejoice, because in those times you begin to see the power of God working in your life. And in distresses, there is all kind of depression, worry, cares. Even in situations like that, Paul says, I take pleasure in these things. Why? These weaknesses drive us to God and also give us the sense of who we are. I am a human being. I can do nothing apart from Christ. That's what Jesus said in John chapter 15 verse 3 to 5. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So when we bring ourselves to that kind of a realization, then what happens? We become the candidates for God to pour out His grace in our life. Then He says, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And verse 9, God said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weaknesses. My strength is made perfect, in a sense. God exactly knows how to help us in our physical infirmity. God exactly knows how to protect us from the reproaches and insult. God exactly knows how to meet our needs, whatever the needs may be. He knows how to shield us from persecution and discouragement. Made perfect. God's strength is not made stronger in our weaknesses. It is made perfect. That means God knows exactly what to do when we are weak. He covers us with His grace. So living by grace gives us this amazing ability to rise up over and above our sicknesses, above the opposition and persecution, and above our financial and whatever other needs in life. We are not defined by our need. We are not defined by our opposition or insults. We are not defined by our sicknesses, because God's grace is able to break free from those limitations and use us for His glory beyond what we can ask or imagine. That is the grace of God. So as believers, let us not look for ways to demonstrate how strong we are. Especially in today's world, there is a saying that says perception is reality. That means if you can project an image of a powerful person, people may think you are powerful. For example, Boris Baker. We thought he is very famous and successful and a happy man. Wherever he goes, people just want to be with him. It's a perception. It's outside persona. But on the other hand, believers are called to take off this artificial persona of strength and wisdom and ability. I can do, I'm better than everybody else. No, I am nothing. I am nobody. Without Christ, I can do nothing. That's the reality. If not by the grace of God, we are nothing at all. Whatever we are, wherever we are, it is because of the grace of God. So when we realize our weaknesses like that, what happens is, then we recognize the blessings of God. And when we recognize the blessings of God, we become filled with gratitude. We become grateful. We don't grumble. For example, when church is not doing well, when ministry is not doing well, when job is failing, when health is failing, when business is going bankrupt, when this pandemic is doing terrible damage to our life in many different ways, instead of grumbling and becoming bitter, we become grateful. We say, thank you, Lord, you have kept me alive. We become grateful for every single little thing in life. And the more grateful we become, the more we receive the grace of God. So weakness in life attracts the grace of God. This also applies to our spirituality. The moment I think I am a praying person, I am a fasting person, I am a very good minister, I am a great preacher, I am a great teacher, I do this and I do that, I have given a lot of money to the church. The moment we bring ourselves into that kind of thinking, we are boasting in our flesh. We are boasting in our false understanding of who we are, because in reality, we are absolutely miserable sinners. If not by the grace of God, there is not a single moment we can look to God and say, I am here. We can't even face God. We cannot look at even the cross of Jesus Christ becomes a terrifying thing for the miserable sinner. If we can look in the face of God, it is because of the grace of God. So, spiritually, oftentimes we hear, so-and-so is a great man of God. There is no great man of God. We all are sinful human beings, children of a great and gracious God. God is so gracious, so merciful, so kind to us, and therefore we can become whoever we are today. So physically, financially, socially, and spiritually, the sooner we realize our weaknesses, the better it is. Because the moment we come to our senses and say, Lord, I am here, a broken vessel, a helpless, without you I cannot go forward, that person becomes an attractive target for the grace of God. So the first point, you will always receive the grace of God when you recognize that you are nothing apart from God. There are so many people who want to be healed. They come to church, they go to healing ministries and all. And the longer they try to be healed, the more sick they become. And then instead of trusting God, they become bitter and miserable, and finally they even die in misery. Instead of that, you pray, you say, God, your word says that you have carried away our infirmities. You took upon yourself our sicknesses, and I believe, Jesus, you can heal me any moment you want. I believe in your power to heal me. You pray, and many times it doesn't come, and you say, Lord, I don't know why I am not healed, but if I am able to breathe today, it is because of your grace. I thank you for giving me the grace to go through this sickness. And I know you can heal me anytime, anywhere, any moment. You have the ability to do so. But Lord, if this infirmity is all that you want in my life, I will still give you glory. When a person takes the sickness in the body in that way and says, God, if I'm alive today, it's only because of your grace, and I thank you for giving me life, that person can be healed sooner than expected. Financially also, you go through poverty, you need and lack. The more we struggle to meet our need, the more we want to move the hand of God to meet our needs, the greater the struggle becomes. But the moment we say, Lord, at least I have something. I'm not starving to death, or maybe. Even in the starvation also, say, Lord, I put my life in your hand. You can do miracle. You can move the mountain. You can move the birds to bring food for me. I believe in you. But if I have to die with the starvation, I will gladly choose to die, because your grace is sufficient in my weaknesses. So when we become grateful to God in all the circumstances of our life, God begins to pour out His grace. He heals our bodies without even knowing us. He rescues us from the need. He protects us from persecution. And He gives us hope in the midst of discouragement and depression. So, weakness attracts the grace of God. Why? Because next point is, life is filled with trouble. Paul is telling that I delight in my weaknesses, because when I am weak, I see the power of God working in my life. But before he said that, let us read in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 8 to 11. He says, life is filled with trouble. Life will go through problems. None of us are immune from the troubles of life. Even great Apostle Paul, if you read carefully, look at his discouragement. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 8 to 11. For we do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened beyond measure. That means beyond we could bear. Above strength, we had no strength left, so that we despaired even of life. That means we wanted to die. Paul struggled so much that he didn't have a desire to live. This is the great apostle Paul. Life will come through such days where we rather die than live in this world. Verse 9, yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. Here Paul literally saying that we were as good as dead. There is nothing we could do. In fact, in many places, Paul was left as a dead person. People thought he is dead. He says, but God who brings the dead back to life. Verse 10, who delivered us from so great a death. They were about to die, but God delivered Paul from death and does deliver us. That, look at here. Past tense God delivered, and present tense He still is delivering, in whom we trust, and He will deliver us. There are three things Paul says. Life is so difficult, tough. There are times we come to the end of ourselves and we say, I'd rather die than go on living. Yet God brings life after death. He delivered us in the past, He is delivering us at the present, and He will deliver us in the future. In this struggle, verse 11 is very beautiful. You also helping together in prayer for us, that thanks be given by many persons on our behalf for the gift granted to us through many. That means Paul says, you are praying for us, and I thank you for praying. Because of your prayer, and together you prayed for us, because of that, God has delivered us in the past, God is delivering us at present, and God will deliver us tomorrow. Because when we are weak, we attract the hand of God, we attract the grace of God, and when the grace of God is working in our life, He delivers us. Be it sickness, He will heal us. Be it financial need, He will provide us. Be it spiritual struggle with certain sinful behaviors, He will help us to break free from that, and we shall live in victorious life. Because wherever the grace of God, there the power of God works. How? The third point is, because we are treasures in earthen vessels. There is a special thing within us. Why is God giving us grace? Why is God bringing us back to life from the point of death? Why is He delivering us? Why did He deliver? Why is He delivering? Why will He deliver? Because there is a treasure in the earthen vessel, because we are made in the image of God. You and I are so special to God. He cares for us. He does not want us to live in sickness. He doesn't want us to live in poverty. He doesn't want to leave us in persecution. He doesn't want us to live in misery and depression. It's not what He wants. But because we're in the earthen vessel, we are in this suffering and sinful world, we will go through these hard times. And when we go through these hard times, what we need to do is to recognize our weaknesses, be broken before God, and say, Lord, unless you help me, I cannot do it. But the problem is, this earthen vessel, the sinful flesh within us, oftentimes wants to become more powerful. We have our pride, we have our ego, we have our greed, we have our lusts. These things, they deceive us in thinking that I am sufficient, I am powerful, I can do, I am better than this. And as a result, instead of delighting in our weaknesses, when we go through weakness, what happens? We become depressed. When a Christian goes through a difficult time, if he's a person who is not realizing his weaknesses, the ultimate result is depression. A Christian who trusts in the flesh becomes sick, depression. A Christian who trusts in money or prosperity or provision, result is depression. A Christian who prides in name and fame and popularity, and when people insult, the end result is depression. So, if I am boasting about my strength, the end is depression. But when I recognize my weaknesses, the end result is delight. I delight in my weaknesses because I know who I am by the grace of God. When I am delighting in my weaknesses, when I trust the grace of God, He rescues me. He heals me, He provides for me, and He protects me. And the more I recognize the hand of God, the more I recognize the grace of God working in my life, the greater the joy in my life. Body may be wrecked with sickness, but my heart will rejoice because I see the grace of God working in my life. So this earthen vessel has a tendency to reject the grace of God and to make a way for oneself by its own strength and ability. When we try to solve our problem by ourselves, we become tired, filled with stress, frustrated, angry, bitter, and the end is misery. But let's see the earthen vessel. Let me read chapter 4, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 7 to 12. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. Suppose tomorrow God blesses us. Today you are a small businessman and tomorrow you become a millionaire, a billionaire. At that time also, a person who is filled with the grace of God will say, it's not because of me, it is because of the grace of God. A sports person like Manny Pacquiao in Philippines, I don't know his personal life, but what we see from the fruit of his ministry, his life, is that this person truly knows God. And whether it is in the ring, whether it is in the political arena, whether it is in the public service, wherever Manny Pacquiao goes, a famous and rich and popular man though he is always humble and kind and down to earth, and always lending a helping hand to the sick and the poor and the needy. And he says it's because of the grace of God. It's because of the grace of God. The boxing world loves Manny Pacquiao not because he's a Christian, but because of his character, his attitude. But Boris Baker, Tiger Wood, you go on naming anybody. They may be famous in their sporting world or their professional life, but deep down in them, when life really hits hard, they cannot handle, because they do not recognize the excellence of the power of God. Paul here says, the excellence of the power of God may be in us, not for us, not from us. Verse 8, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. For we who live are always delivered to death for Jesus' sake, that this life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So then, death is working in us, but life is working in you. So with that, I want us to think about our own personal life. Are you attracting the grace of God? Are you experiencing the power of God when you go through difficulties? Do you recognize the excellence of the power of God working in and through your life, or do you take pride in your own success? a weak person who is honest and sincere before God, who doesn't put a front, who is far from hypocrisy, attracts the grace of God. And though life is filled with troubles, that person sees the power of God working in his life. And when the power of God works in that person's life and that person becomes successful, at that time also he says, it is not because of me, it is because of the grace of God. And he becomes filled with joy. He delights in every situation. He becomes content and becomes a grateful person. So let us become this earthen vessel that carries a precious treasure and attracts the grace of God. In your physical sickness, may you attract the grace of God. In your financial poverty, may you attract the grace of God. In your social persecution or insult or all kind of oppression, may you attract the grace of God.